Hi, good afternoon. This is the Democratic Alliance Labour Report. Thank you very much for listening and coming in to the report. I really appreciate it. Like I always say, please share this. It's good that this news gets around. It's good that people understand what is happening out there in the labour law, in the labour field, in employment. I want to just quote from an economist, Davy Root, and he's talking about the employment figures. And he says, and I quote, "The numbers are absolutely horrible." Unofficially now, the unemployment rate is 42.6%. It is absolutely horrible. And of course, Davy Root is correct. The drop of another 1.4 million rand in this last quarter is bad. We officially, government is telling us it's 32.5%. That's from Stats South Africa. It's never been this high, and it's been the worst employment figures in 13 years. They predict that we're only going to get back to the 2019 figures in 2024. So thank you once again for coming in to listen to the Democratic Alliance Labour Report. This is Michael Bagram. I am the Labour spokesperson. Every single industry seems to have dropped in numbers. Finance, construction, social services, manufacturing. When you see manufacturing drop, you know you've got real problems. And we can't afford it. We cannot afford to have this. And it appears that government thinks it should be business as usual. The State of the Nation address didn't tell us much about employment. They didn't somehow talk to us about how they're going to try and tackle this. They throw money at it, yes. They throw money at youth unemployment, which we think is about 65%. COSATU are telling us that it is the worst it's ever been. Now, if COSATU is saying that, then you must understand that there are real problems out there in the field. We have 15 million people, approximately 15 million people in South Africa who have some sort of a job. But we've got about 7.5 who are officially unemployed. People who are looking for work, 7.5 million people. That is horrific. And Davy Root is understating it. It is absolutely horrific. It continues to shrink and deteriorate. And the confidence level within the business community is at the lowest it's ever been. In that expanded definition, which is about 43%, what do? We do other things. We, for instance, bring out new regulations about critical skills. And we make it more and more difficult to bring people into South Africa who have critical skills. They've published those regulations, and they're saying to us that it's going to become almost impossible to bring someone in if they've got critical skills. That means you don't have someone here in South Africa that can actually perform that. And if you don't have that person, they can't train anyone. If they can't train anyone, then we've got no further employment. What is it telling you? It's telling you that the government doesn't seem to care. I quite frankly don't think they don't understand. They just don't understand how economy works and how employment works. So the critical skills regulations are absolutely impossible to fathom out. I don't understand. They don't understand. And when businesses want to bring someone through because they can't find someone to do that function in South Africa, they try and outsource it abroad. Cape Town, however, is improving. We can thank the provincial government, the Cape Provincial Government. We can thank the City Council under the leadership of James Voss, Alderman James Voss, who are only at 29%. That's still bad, but compared 29% to 43%, we've got a much better system going here in Cape Town, in the Cape Province. The economic action in the Cape Province is starting to improve. We have an economic action plan, and we have to send a shout out to both the Premier of the Cape Province and James Voss. Well, being the highest in 13 years, excuse me, where do we go? What does the budget tell us? The budget did, yes, put some money aside for the jab, which is good. And hopefully as we get the jab, we're going to get more and more people back at work. But it's only hopefully. And of course, as I said earlier, we're then only going to get back to the employment figures in 2024. There has been an establishment of a fund to actually try and help those individuals who don't have a pension fund. I'm hoping that that social security net will take us somewhere. Well, of course, what we did here in this last week, we had an interesting discussion with regard to the minimum wage, because on top of the unemployment in South Africa, we then have the minimum wage being increased. Now, no one begrudges anyone a greater minimum wage. That no one does. But what you do have to understand is that when the minimum wage gets to a level where an employer is saying, no more, I can't, what do? They either ignore the minimum wage altogether and pay what they want to pay, or they go into a retrenchment program, is what we're seeing. I, for one, as a labour lawyer, have spent the last 6 months helping clients of mine, small businesses, retrench. Well, what we're seeing is that feeding into greater unemployment in the future. The research that has been done by the Minimum Wage Commission seems to tell you that they're not retrenching. Now, I don't know where they get these figures from. When I speak to fellow labour lawyers across the country, they're all telling me that's what they're doing. And this is across the country. They tell me that all they're doing at the moment is retrenching, dismissing for operational requirements. So I don't understand it. What is strange, of course, is government itself in the Expanded Public Works Program, EPWP workers, the workers you see on the side of the road in uniform. They're only getting a small amount. I think it's 11 Rand 42 cents. Why can't government pay them the minimum wage? Well, they tell you they can't pay the minimum wage because they can't afford it. But doesn't it cut both ways? If the employers in the private sector can't afford it, they say, no, sorry, you can apply for an exemption. And you can get your exemption if you can't afford it. Let me tell you something about that exemption. And I asked the Minister to explain it, and in fact the Director General of the Department of Employment and Labour. Both of them tell me the exemption is easy to get and it'll help people out who can't afford it if they genuinely can't afford it. Well, let me tell you, the exemption is merely 10%, so you still have to pay 90% of the minimum wage, and that's if you can get the exemption. Now, you tell me a small business that can get the audited figures, can look at getting all the paperwork, how many orders, showing the figures of the last 3 years. It's impossible. When you speak to small businesses, they don't have auditors, they don't have lawyers, they don't have people that can fill in those exemption forms. I tried to fill in exemption forms for a small business and I struggled. Maybe I'm just no good, but I've been practicing law for 35 years and I'm struggling to fill in an exemption form for a small business that can't afford an auditor. You explain to me how the exemption process and form can actually help them when they can't afford the minimum wage. Well, what do? They just say, no, we're not going to employ anymore. Well, let's have a look at another area. What about compliance? What about small businesses who say, well, we can't afford the minimum wage. We have to actually put food on the table for the families, so we're going to pay less than the minimum wage. Have you seen an inspector? No. Are there enough inspectors? No. Are the trade unions even going to do anything about it? Normally, no. The trade unions I know up in KwaZulu-Natal, in the clothing factories, in the sweatshops, are saying, our members are saying, we're earning less than the minimum wage, but please don't do anything, otherwise we'll lose our jobs. That's the reality of South Africa today. The department can't afford more inspectors, the people can't get more inspectors, and they're just going ahead and doing what they want. Compliance is a joke. They are, however, telling us that the farms are actually complying with the minimum wage. Well, that's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But what are the farmers doing in exchange? They're retrenching. The people are losing their homes, their jobs, and their sustenance. Normally, farm labourers have employment, accommodation, food, whatever they need actually on the farm itself. But when the minute you lose your job, you've got nothing. So I don't believe we've got a real issue over here. The Director General of the Department of Employment and Labour last week said he understands that small employers will suffer a little bit. What he doesn't understand is that small employers are suffering already and they do not have the wherewithal to pay that minimum wage. Well, the increase is coming in now, and as you listen to this, everyone has to face that increase. We can't have it. So thank you very much for listening to me. It's Michael Bagram, and as we move into March, let's hope and pray that the employment situation in South Africa can help. It can't be business as usual. Thank you very much.